Hi, my name is Nicole Sleeth, and today I'm going to show you how I mix colors. All right, so I'm going to mix this color. It's just a paint swatch in kind of a brownish color. And I'm going to use this as my gold color and mix these to turn into that. So this is my palette that I typically use. It's Gamblin Titanium White, Williamsburg Permanent Crimson, Williamsburg Quinacridone Red, Gamblin Cadmium Red Light, M-Gram Transparent Red Iron Oxide, Gamblin Raw Sienna, Gamblin Cadmium Lemon, Williamsburg Viridian, and Williamsburg Ultramarine Blue. So when I'm mixing a color, first I need to identify in my gold color what the hue, value, and chroma should be. So in here we're looking at a brown, kind of more of a, I think probably more of a coolish brown. The value is, I would say, relatively dark. Not super dark, but darkish. And chroma is kind of a mid chroma. It's not too vibrant, saturated. It's not too gray either. So I want to take a look at my palette and decide which colors are going to give me the best mixture to get started with this. So being kind of a brownish color, I'm going to go with some transparent red iron oxide, some blue, ultramarine blue, and a little bit of white to lighten that up. Now, I'm probably not going to get quite the right color with this, but it's a starting place and will hopefully put me in the right ballpark. So I'm mixing these colors fairly thoroughly. And then I'll need to assess how they look in terms of the hue, value, and chroma in order to know how to change the color to have it match my gold color. All right, so this is the transparent red iron oxide, ultramarine blue, and titanium white. I can look at these two compared to one another, and I see that the value is very similar. This is a little too dark. It's too high chroma and too warm. I have more of a, I would say, yellowish brown here. This is more of a grayed down, cooler brown. And like I said, it's also a little bit darker. So I'm going to add a tiny bit more blue in order to darken it and gray it down, cool it down. I'm also going to add some permanent crimson. That should bring more of this cooler, let's say almost purplish brown. The nice thing about putting or using a swatch like this is you can put the paint directly on it and see how it looks. So when I look at this, it's still too dark. Now it's important to match the value first, as long as you're in the right hue family. You know, we're not completely off here. Match the value first because it'll make it much easier to compare the color. So I'm adding some titanium white, and that is going to lighten it, it's going to gray it down, and it's going to cool it down as well. So taking another look at that. Now I see the value is much more similar now, but when I take a close look here, it is far too warm and yellow. We really want to gray that right down. So in order to do that, I'm going to bring in quite a bit more blue. To begin with, we'll probably need some other adjustments. All right, so I've got that same mixture with more blue in it now. I'm adding a little bit on my card. Taking a close look, it's actually very close right now. It's very close. I'm just going to flatten that with my finger so the texture of the paint doesn't catch the light as badly. It is really close, but I think it still has a little too much green. And I do find that these two colors, Ultramarine Blue and Transparent Red Iron Oxide, tend to almost get this greenish hue together. So I'm taking a very small amount of permanent crimson, which is a nice, rich, cool red, in order to kind of cut that green aspect that I'm getting here. I'm trying that out again. Oops. All right, taking a closer look. And I would say here it is almost dead on. That's the color that got mixed, and here's the color that we're matching. It could maybe be a touch lighter, so I'll pop a little bit more white in this. I've probably added too much now, but let's see. Now, every time you add a color, it changes the hue, the value, and the chroma. So as I add white, this is not only lightening the value. Yes, I have added too much white. Oh, it was better before. It's not only changing the value, but it's also graying down the color. So it's taking down the chroma and is changing the hue. It's making it a little cooler still. So I've added more blue to this. Now we're getting much closer. There we go. So I'm going to leave it at that. I think it's close enough. It's a close enough match. But one thing I did just want to highlight, as I was going on about before with the white, is that every time you add a color to your mixture, you're changing all three of those characteristics. There's no way to change just one characteristic and not affect the rest. They're all kind of working in tandem together. So think about each color you mix, each change you make to this color. Think about how that's creating a whole new color. And that should help narrow down which pigment to add in order to reach your goal color. So I hope that was helpful. Try to consider each of those three variables when you're mixing color. Hue, value, and chroma. Hue being the color family, whether it's sort of a yellowish color, whether it's green, blue, whatever. Value being the lightness or darkness, and chroma being the saturation, how vibrant or how gray it is. Lastly, you want to consider color temperature, which is the relationship of the colors together. And that's something that I think can be commonly misunderstood with color temperature. There is no inherent color temperature of a color. It's always relative to another color. Now sometimes that might be relative back to the color wheel, is the context people might be thinking of. But color temperature is more about fine-tuning the relationships of colors, not necessarily an individual color on its own. Now in this example, I was matching a color that was directly on a piece of paper, being the little paint swatch here. Sometimes you won't have the opportunity to do that if you're painting from life, for example, painting outside. You'll be more comparing what you see on your reference with what you see on your palette. So in order to do that more accurately, you can use a color isolator, which is a neutral gray card with a hole in it. And that is used to isolate the color that you're trying to match. So for instance, if I'm trying to match this color, but I can't hold the paint right up onto it, I just want to close one eye and look through the color isolator at my gold color, and then with my other color isolator, check the palette, check the color that I'm mixing in order to see whether it matches or not. And that way you're framing your gold color against a neutral gray background, so it's easier to see the objective color rather than the color in relationship to its surrounding area. I hope that helps. Thank you so much.